The year is 1187. In Europe, the sound of bells carries across frozen fields. From England to Burgundy, from Genoa to the Rhine, the same call echoes from every cathedral tower. Jerusalem has fallen. The news travels not in words, but in shock. It moves with the speed of fire across parchment. The city once believed to be eternal is now in the hands of an Eastern king. A man the West calls by one name, Saladin. In Rome, the Pope weeps before the altar. In Paris, knights kneel on the stones of Notre Dame and vow to take up the cross. In London, a king hears the news in silence and walks alone to the chapel. His name is Richard Plantagenet, heir of the Angevin Empire, soon to be called the Lionheart. To his people, the crusade is destiny. To him, it is duty. He gathers fleets, soldiers, and gold from every corner of his realm. The ports of Marseille and Genoa become furnaces of preparation for a war not only of armies, but of faiths. The priests speak of redemption. The merchants speak of profit. The poets speak of glory, but none speak of mercy. It has no place in the plan. The ships sail east in spring. Thousands leave behind the cold rain of Europe for the furnace of the Holy Land. They believe they are chosen. They believe they will reclaim what was lost. They do not yet know that the lesson awaiting them is not victory, but humility. The chronicles of the Third Crusade begin not in triumph, but in blindness. Two kings will rise from opposite horizons, one forged in conquest, one tempered in patience. Their meeting will reshape the meaning of faith and reveal a truth buried beneath the desert. That mercy can cut deeper than any sword. Monhendarin. The year is 1189. The sea between Europe and the East is filled with sails. From the harbors of Marseille, Genoa, and Messina, fleets of knights and soldiers move toward the rising sun. They sail not for conquest alone, but for the recovery of what they call the kingdom of God. Among the thousands who march beneath the cross, one man stands apart. Richard Plantagenet, King of England. He is young, powerful, and certain of his destiny. To his men, he is a warrior blessed by heaven. To his enemies, a storm approaching. Richard does not travel alone. From the north comes the army of Denmark. From the west, ships from Normandy and Aquitaine. And from the south, the banners of France under King Philip Augustus. Together, they form the most formidable host Christendom has ever seen. Their destination is Acre, a coastal fortress city held by the armies of Saladin. The siege has already lasted nearly 2 years. The sands around its walls are a graveyard of broken weapons and unburied dead. When Richard arrives, the air smells of salt, rot, and iron. The cries of the sick echo between the tents. The siege of Acre is not a battle. It is a slow death. Dysentery spreads through the camp. The heat suffocates armor and rots supplies. The ships that bring reinforcements also bring disease. Richard takes command of the siege with the same precision he brings to a campaign of music or architecture. He orders engines built, towers repaired, and trenches deepened. Day after day, stones crash against the walls, while the defenders answer with fire. For every man who falls, 2 more take his place. Faith is infinite. Flesh is not. Inside the city, the garrison fights with desperate endurance. They are not fanatics. They are soldiers following orders. When their last well runs dry, they raise the white banner. Acre surrenders. Richard enters the city in July. He walks through streets littered with corpses and ash. The walls are cracked, the mosques silent, the air thick with the smell of burnt oil. He has taken the stronghold that no other crusader could breach. It should be a moment of triumph. Instead, It becomes a stain that will follow his name for centuries. 3,000 prisoners remain from the garrison. Men, craftsmen, soldiers, and their families. They are held as hostages while negotiations begin. Saladin promises ransom and safe exchange. But time passes. The gold does not arrive. Richard grows restless. He sees delay as defiance. He believes mercy is weakness, and weakness is sin. On the morning of August 20th, he gives a single order. The hostages are to be executed. Under the blazing sky, the prisoners are led beyond the city walls. They are bound in groups, silent, too exhausted even to plead. The Crusaders stand in lines, their armor gleaming like mirrors in the sun. The trumpets sound once, the swords rise, and 3,000 lives end in the dust. The chroniclers record that Richard turned his horse away before the killing was done. He did not watch. He did not need to. The message had been delivered. The Holy Land would be won by steel, not mercy. That night, the wind carried the smell of death across the plain. No celebration followed. The men sat quietly beside their fires. Some prayed, most did not. Far to the east, in the hills overlooking the sea, another army waited. Silent, watching the smoke rise from Acre. Its leader did not curse. He did not retaliate. He knelt on the sand and prayed. His name was Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. The West would call him Saladin. In that moment, two kinds of kings faced one another across the waste of Galilee. One ruled through conquest, the other through restraint. Neither knew that before the war was done. Each would change the other forever. Beyond the scorched fields of Acre, the banners of Saladin flutter in the desert wind. The Sultan stands upon a ridge, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the city smolders. He knows what has happened long before the riders bring confirmation. 3,000 of his soldiers executed after surrender, their bodies left for the vultures, their faith consigned to dust. The men around him await orders for vengeance. They expect the horns of war, the call to strike back, but the order does not come. Saladin remains silent. He commands no retaliation. Instead, he turns to his scribe and dictates a message. Calm, formal, restrained. It is addressed to Richard of England. It speaks not of anger, but of honor. It asks for the bodies to be buried. To the Crusaders, this silence is incomprehensible. To Saladin's army, it is discipline beyond measure. His patience becomes legend before the battle resumes. His soldiers whisper that their commander fights not for land or gold, but for something that cannot be taken by siege. Dignity. The Sultan's mercy is not a moment of softness. It is a calculation. It is a weapon more precise than any blade. He knows the weight of humiliation. He knows that vengeance burns fast and dies, while patience corrodes the soul of an enemy slowly. From within, the days pass. Richard strengthens his position along the coast, rebuilding Acre as a base for the march south. His engineers construct siege towers. His smiths repair broken armor. Every sound within the Crusader camp is iron against iron. But beyond the dunes, Saladin's camp is quiet. No boasting, no drums, only the steady rhythm of discipline. In the following weeks, something unexpected occurs. Messengers cross between the camps, under white flags, bearing letters sealed in wax. What begins as negotiation becomes conversation. The tone shifts. Richard asks for the safe passage of envoys. Saladin agrees. Saladin asks for Christian physicians to treat prisoners. Richard allows it. Between two men raised in the language of war, there emerges a vocabulary of respect. The chroniclers would later describe this exchange as a contest of chivalry. The battle for moral ground. Each gesture of mercy is a strike of a different kind. When disease once again spreads through the Crusader lines, Saladin sends fruit, ice, and medicine from his own stores. He sends them not as tribute, but as acknowledgement. The enemy is worthy of compassion because the enemy is human. Richard accepts the gifts, but says nothing. His soldiers whisper of witchcraft, of hidden poison. Yet when the fever breaks, he keeps the physician in his service. The desert does not forgive weakness, but it remembers grace. The exchange becomes a quiet miracle amid ruin. For Saladin, the gesture costs little. For Richard, it costs pride. And in that cost lies the beginning of transformation. The two armies watch one another for weeks without open battle. Between them stretch plains of dust and bones, the relics of years of holy war. Each side prays to the same God, in a different tongue, beneath the same pitiless sun. When the Crusader army finally moves south toward Jaffa, Saladin does not attack. He allows them to march. He waits for the moment when they will exhaust themselves, when discipline will falter, when the heat and hunger will test their faith more than swords ever could. It is not cowardice, it is strategy, and it is mercy. Disguised as war, the Sultan understands what Richard does not yet see, that every empire, no matter how righteous, is undone not by defeat, but by arrogance. The patience of one man becomes the trial of thousands. The war continues, but the meaning of victory begins to change. In the Chronicles of the Crusade, this chapter is written without exclamation or flourish. It simply reads, Saladin withheld his wrath, and the lion fell silent. The army moves again. September 1091. The sun burns without mercy, the sea wind offering only salt. The Crusaders march south from Acre toward Jaffa, a line of men and horses stretching across the coastal plain like a moving scar. Their goal is simple: reach the ports, secure the supply lines, and from there, advance toward Jerusalem. But nothing about the road is simple. Every step is shadowed by an unseen enemy. Saladin's army rides parallel to the Crusaders, always at the edge of sight. Their scouts move like smoke over the dunes. When the Crusaders stop to rest, they vanish. When the Crusaders move, they return. For 10 days, the march becomes a duel of endurance. The heat crushes armor into flesh. The horses die by the hundreds. Water barrels split under pressure. Men fall asleep standing. Richard rides among them, his chainmail black with sweat, his voice hoarse from command. He eats little. He sleeps less. To his men, he is tireless, carved from iron and will. But even iron bends. The attack begins on the 11th day. It is sudden, precise, and furious. Arrows fall like rain. Saladin's cavalry strikes from the dunes, fast, disciplined, and silent. The air turns to fire and dust. The Crusaders tighten formation, shields overlapping, spears forward. Richard orders the knights to hold the line, not to break ranks. But the discipline of tired men is fragile. The rear columns collapse under the weight of the assault. Confusion spreads faster than command. For an hour, the desert becomes chaos. Steel flashing, horses screaming, bodies falling in waves. The drums of Saladin's army beat in rhythm with the sound of hooves. The Crusaders are surrounded, their flanks bleeding under endless motion. Then, as if the storm itself had paused, the drums stop. The silence is more terrifying than the sound. Richard raises his sword. The order is given. The charge begins. The Knights of England, France, and the Templars surge forward. Their formation cuts through the cavalry line like a blade through cloth. The first shock scatters Saladin's front ranks. The second drives them back toward the dunes. The air fills with the sound of shattering lances and broken breath. When the dust clears, the field is theirs. The Crusaders have survived Arsuf, but the victory is not what it seemed. Saladin's army withdraws in perfect order, not routed, not destroyed. They leave behind no wounded, no spoils, no cries of despair. They vanish as they came. Disciplined, unbroken, deliberate, Richard stands among the wreckage of the battle. The corpses of his men lie beside those of the enemy, indistinguishable in death. The wind moves through the banners, whispering over armor still warm from combat. He looks across the horizon, expecting pursuit. There is none. That night, the Crusaders camp near Arsuf. The fires burn low. There are no songs, no speeches, only exhaustion and silence. In the distance, across the plain, the lights of Saladin's encampment glow like a constellation. Even in retreat, they seem unshaken. Richard's captains call it cowardice. He does not answer. For the first time, he sees something in his enemy that disturbs him. Control, mercy within strength, victory without cruelty. The Battle of Arsuf will be recorded as a triumph for the Crusaders, but the chronicles never capture what followed. The moment after the fighting, when Richard stood alone in the stillness and realized that his greatest opponent was not Saladin's army, but Saladin himself. The Sultan had shown him what power looked like when guided by restraint. It was a lesson few conquerors learned. Fewer survived long enough to understand it. In the months to come, both men would carry that silence with them. The memory of Arsuf, where one man learned mercy, and the other proved that even war could have honor. The march south continued, slower now. The land was the same. The men were not. Winter comes to the Levant not with snow, but with silence. The rains fall for weeks, turning the desert to mud. The heat fades, replaced by cold winds from the north. Both armies are trapped by the season. Richard's along the coast, Saladin's inland beyond the hills. The war pauses, but it does not end. The siege machine stands still. The banners droop. The drums are silent. Only the crows move freely between the camps. They do not see sides, only bodies. Richard spends the winter in Jaffa, a fortress of stone and disease. The city stinks of salt and rot. Supplies from the sea are delayed by storms, and every shipment brings fewer men than it sends back. He commands repairs on the walls, writes to Europe for reinforcements, and studies the enemy from afar. He knows Saladin watches him, just as he watches Saladin. No man can hold anger forever. The fire that drove the crusade begins to cool. The soldiers grow weary of glory. Their prayers are shorter now, their sins longer. What began as faith has become survival. Across the plains, Saladin faces the same truth. The Sultan's armies are vast, but they are tired. Years of constant movement, years of burying their dead. He has won every moral victory, but each one costs him men, food, and time. The treasury drains, the borders strain, even his patience is tested. In the midst of this weariness, letters begin to cross the battlefield. Not threats, not demands, but words of reason. They are carried by envoys under white flags, written in Arabic and Latin, translated by men who understand both languages but belong to neither. The letters are formal, precise, and cold. They speak of prisoners, of exchanges, of truces and safe passages. Each ends with the same sentence, "May God judge between us." At first, the letters are practical, logistics of war. Then, slowly, they become personal. Saladin writes of the cost of famine, of the suffering of his people. Richard replies with the burdens of command, the weight of the crown, the sickness in his camp. The correspondence grows into something unthinkable for a holy war. Understanding, the Crusaders begin to notice small changes. Captured soldiers are no longer executed. Wounded enemies are returned across the lines. When Muslim prisoners are found half dead after skirmishes, they are carried to the Crusader infirmary. The example comes from the top. Richard has seen the power of restraint. He begins to use it. In early 1192, Saladin sends a group of captured Templar knights back to Richard. They are clothed, fed, and escorted with honor. Each is given a fresh horse and a skin of water. No ransom is demanded. No word of thanks is requested. It is a gesture of mercy, silent and absolute. The chroniclers record that when the knights returned, Richard stood without speaking for a long time. He dismissed his counselors, dismissed his guards, and ordered no retaliation for the rest of the month. It was not weakness. It was reflection. The war between the two men becomes a different kind of battle. Not of swords, but of conscience. Each act of compassion is a counter to the other's cruelty. Each gesture of mercy an answer to years of blood. To their soldiers, this restraint is impossible to comprehend. They see only the surface, two kings delaying the inevitable. But the truth is buried deeper, in what both men now understand, that victory bought with vengeance is already lost. As the winter ends, the plains dry once more. The mud hardens into dust. The smell of iron returns to the air. The drums of war resume. But the men who march now do so under different skies. They have seen mercy in the eyes of their enemies, and it has left a scar deeper than any wound. When spring comes, both armies are ready once again to fight. But what they are fighting for has begun to change. By spring of 1192, the Crusader army moves again. The rains fade, the rivers dry, and the road to Jerusalem opens like a scar across the earth. The soldiers march through valleys scorched by 2 generations of holy war. Every mile bears the bones of the last crusade. They advance with caution. The lessons of Acre and Arsuf linger like ghosts. Richard rides at the head of his columns, the cross stitched on his cloak, the sword at his side. His men look to him as a saint of battle, a king chosen by God to reclaim his city. But even Richard knows what lies ahead is not salvation. It is ruin disguised as faith. The march southward is slow, strangled by heat and hunger. Water runs short. Food spoils. Desertion becomes common. Every night, the campfires burn fewer and farther apart. Yet still, the men dream of Jerusalem, the city of their sermons, the city that no one among them has seen. Beyond the hills, Saladin's scouts move silently. They do not engage. They watch, they measure, they wait for every step the Crusaders take. Saladin knows it before the dust settles. He is not defending a city of stone, but an idea that mercy can outlast empire. At last, after months of hardship, the Crusaders reach the ridge above Jerusalem. The city lies below, wrapped in haze, its golden dome glinting beneath the noon sun. The sight halts the army. Men fall to their knees. Some weep, some laugh, some simply stare. For Richard, it is not victory, it is clarity. He looks upon the walls and understands that to take Jerusalem is to destroy it. He has seen what happens when holy cities fall. Acre's corpses still rot in his memory. He knows that if he orders the assault, tens of thousands will die, and the city he came to reclaim will drown in blood once more. He gathers his commanders. They argue through the night. The generals urge attack. The priests demand fulfillment of the vow. Richard listens, then speaks only once. We cannot hold what we destroy. In the morning, the banners do not advance. They turn. The order spreads through the ranks like frost. The Crusaders will not attack Jerusalem. They will march back to the coast. For the men who marched from England and France, it feels like betrayal. For the king, it is something else. Restraint, the same lesson he once learned from his enemy. When Saladin hears of Richard's decision, he does not gloat. He sends no army to pursue. Instead, he sends a single rider with a message. The letter bears no seal of arrogance, no word of triumph, only an invitation. The roads to Jerusalem will remain open. Christian pilgrims may enter unarmed. No tax, no ransom, no insult. The city is holy to all who believe. It is a gesture beyond politics, beyond war. It is mercy made real. The Crusaders return to the coast through the same wasteland they crossed before. But they are not the same men. Their armor hangs looser. Their voices are quieter. They have seen an enemy who fought without hatred and ruled without cruelty. For a war born in blood, it is the first sign of peace. At Jaffa, the Crusaders fortify the city once more, preparing for what they think will be the final confrontation. But the final battle never comes. The land itself is tired. The armies are exhausted. The kings, both of them, have learned that there is no lasting victory in conquest, only in restraint. In the chronicles of Europe, some will call it failure. In the records of the East, it will be remembered as justice. But history does not belong to those who shout the loudest. It belongs to those who act when silence is hardest. And in that silence, beneath the endless sun of Palestine, two kings now understand each other. The lion and the sultan, reflections in the same sand. Summer of 1192. The desert wind is dry again, carrying the smell of dust and decay. The war has burned for 3 years, and neither side can continue. The fields are empty. The wells are poisoned. The bones of men and horses line the coastal roads. Even faith is tired. In the Crusader camp near Jaffa, Richard sits in a chair of carved cedar, staring at a map that no longer matters. Every city, every hill, every line of ink has been paid for in lives. He knows the truth that no commander wants to speak aloud. The war has reached the point where victory and loss are the same. Across the plains, Saladin receives word of Richard's condition. The king is sick again, the fever returning, his body weakened by wounds and exhaustion. The Sultan issues no command to strike. He orders his men to hold. Mercy, once a gesture, has become policy. For weeks, the two armies sit facing each other, neither advancing. Envoys ride back and forth, their banners white against the burning sky. They speak of ceasefire, of trade, of pilgrims and passage. Each message is deliberate, precise, unadorned by pride. Finally, at the end of August, the two rulers agree to meet, not in battle, but in words. The meeting takes place between the lines, under a canopy of pale canvas. The wind moves through the tent like breath. There are no trumpets, no ceremony, only two men who have come to understand the cost of righteousness. The treaty they draft will be known as the Treaty of Ramla. It divides the land not by conquest, but by reason. The Crusaders will keep the coast, Jaffa, Acre, and the ports northward. Jerusalem will remain under Saladin's rule, open to Christian pilgrims who come in peace. No tribute, no humiliation, no vengeance. It is a treaty born not of faith, but of exhaustion. Yet within it lies something greater than either man expected: balance. When the final seals are pressed into the wax, neither king claims victory. There is no celebration, only quiet acknowledgement. Saladin looks across the tent, and Richard meets his eyes. For a moment, the distance between east and west disappears. They do not speak the same language, but they understand each other perfectly. When Richard departs for the coast, Saladin rides beside him for several miles. They exchange gifts, horses, armor, fruit from Damascus, but the real gift is silence. They part as men who have measured each other completely and found respect. Richard returns to Acre, preparing to sail home. His body is failing, the fever constant. He will never see Jerusalem. He leaves behind an unfinished war, but a completed understanding. Saladin rides back to Damascus. He enters the city without fanfare. No parades, no banners, no praise. He donates his wealth to the poor, pays his soldiers in full, and orders hospitals built along the pilgrim roads. He dies the next year, owning nothing. His treasury contains only a few silver coins and the robe he was buried in. Richard dies 6 years later in France, struck by an arrow during a siege. The chroniclers say his last words were of forgiveness. If they are true, then both men found peace the world could not give them in life. The Treaty of Ramla endures for years, an island of calm in a sea of war. It is remembered by few, broken by many, but the echo of it remains. Two rulers who met in mercy when the world expected only blood. Long after both men are gone, their names will be carved into opposite sides of history. But those who read carefully will see that the line between them is not war, but understanding. The war ends not with the sound of trumpets, but with the silence of wind over stone. The armies disperse, the banners fall, and the desert, patient and eternal, reclaims what men had borrowed from it. The chronicles of the Third Crusade are written in monasteries far from the places they describe. Monks in England and France record the events in ink made from soot and wine. They write of battles and victories, of holy vows and divine purpose. But when they reach the name of Saladin, the tone changes, the words soften, the hatred fades. Even in the pens of his enemies, the Sultan becomes something more than a foe. They call him wise. They call him merciful. They call him a man who ruled by faith, not by fury. And for the first time in centuries, a Christian chronicler writes of a Muslim leader not as the Antichrist, but as a king worthy of respect. It is a small miracle of history, one born not of blood, but of restraint. Richard's scribes record the same transformation. Their king, once the symbol of Christian pride, leaves the Holy Land not as a conqueror, but as a man who has seen the cost of his own conviction. In his letters home, he writes not of triumph, but of sorrow. That war has no end when righteousness becomes its excuse. The crusade had begun as a promise to reclaim Jerusalem. It ends with an understanding that some places are too sacred to be owned. In the centuries that follow, new wars will come, new kings will rise, new empires will fall, but the memory of Richard and Saladin remains. Two men divided by faith, joined by humanity. Their story survives because it defied expectation. In an age when cruelty was praised as strength, mercy became the act that outlived the sword. It is written in the margins of every chronicle, in the pauses between dates and battles, where truth hides from pride. Those who came after tried to erase it. They preferred tales of conquest, of divine victory, of vengeance justified. But history remembers differently. It remembers the day a king sent fruit and ice to his enemy. It remembers the day another king refused to burn a city he could not keep. It remembers the hands that chose to open rather than close. That is the mercy of memory. It chooses what the sword cannot. In the quiet that follows, the world continues. Markets rebuilt, roads reopened, pilgrims walking again toward the city both men spared. Jerusalem remains, as it always has, suspended between heaven and earth, claimed by all, possessed by none. Time wears away the scars of war, but not the lessons. For those who study the chronicles, one truth returns again and again. Mercy is not weakness. Mercy is mastery. It is the moment when the strong remember what the weak have always known, that the only victory that endures is the one that leaves something worth living for. Centuries later, travelers still walk the same roads. The bones of knights and soldiers lie beneath their feet, unnamed, unclaimed, almost forgotten. The wind whispers through the same valleys where the banners of Richard once rose and fell. The sun still burns the plains where Saladin's camp stood. Archaeologists dig where kings once prayed. They find arrowheads, coins, fragments of armor, but never the thing they seek most: understanding. That lies buried not in the ground, but in the silence between two men who learned what their empires could not. The Lionheart and the Sultan, enemies by oath, allies by mercy. Their story ends where all wars end, not in triumph, but in recognition, the realization that faith without compassion is as hollow as conquest without purpose. Every century since has borrowed their names, their myths, their symbols, but the truth remains older than both. That kindness is remembered longer than victory. The sands of the Holy Land do not keep monuments. They keep echoes, the echo of steel, the echo of prayer, and somewhere beneath it all, the echo of two men who learned that even in war, the soul has a choice. Mercy endures where empires do not, and the desert remembers everything.